I believe the source, or rather the root of all resentment, is ignorance. The less you understand someone, the more resentment you can feel toward the person. And on the contrary, if you understand someone really well, then you will probably not be that resentful. And you've probably heard people say, "Oh, I like, how can you be like this? I just can't understand. Like, how can you be like this?" This is probably something people tend to say because a lot of resentment, in my opinion, is built around you not getting why they behave a certain way, why they say certain things, why they make certain life decisions. And I think it's useful to remind yourself of that, because I think that also, at least for me, helps me dial down my ego and helps me deal with resentment in a better way and also be less resentful. Because whenever I notice myself, not whenever, but often when I notice myself experiencing resentment, I tend to remember and kind of remind myself of this principle. Like, the better you understand someone, the less resentful you will be. Because if you had full context on how they came to be this person, you would probably get it. You would be like, okay, makes sense that you're this way. And so then you wouldn't be resentful because you understand. And for this reason, I do think it's very useful to be precise in both giving feedback or telling people about something that you're critiquing them on, but also asking for specificity when someone is critiquing you or when you notice someone being resentful, asking for specifics. And I also believe a lot of contention between people and a lot of problems come from, in general, poor communication. And I mean, that's kind of something everyone knows, I guess, but a lot of that, I think, comes specifically from misunderstanding what the other person believes and thinks. And there's a very interesting principle from a book which I read many years ago. I don't know how it's called in English, but it was called basically the Harvard concept in German when I read it. And so the idea of this book, or one of the ideas in this book, is that there are positions and interests and positions. So everyone has their interests, and every person has, in debates, for example, in arguments, they have their positions. And what is interesting is that very often people argue even though they have the same interest, and they're basically just arguing over positions. So I've had some very interesting conversations with people where on the surface, it seemed like I completely disagreed with them on, let's say, political topics or topics that are more controversial. And what I've noticed, because I tend to be quite firm in making my point and not allowing any kind of emotional coloring to get into that conversation, and not allowing any kind of labels in terms of like, oh, so you're like this, so you're that type of person. But I tend to really be firm on going into the actual conversation, going into the actual arguments, and really seeing, okay, where do we disagree, and trying to be very precise, which is something that I'm trying to do. And so what I've realized is that very often both people on opposite sides of the table are basically, they want the same thing. They desire the same future in terms of, for example, if it's about some sort of politics related topic, or one very controversial topic in the past was the pandemic, for example. And you can have two people who have different arguments and who are arguing for different positions, but they have the same interest, right? They want people to be safe. They want businesses to not go out of business, because then that leads to a lot of suffering, and so on. And I'm talking about small businesses who were most affected, for example, restaurants and so on. And so we have these interests, which are usually very aligned. And when you can lead with that, and when you can align on those, then I think it opens up for a much better conversation. And so I think that is a very useful principle, to try to find as much common ground as you can without having to concede your position, without having to concede what you truly believe in. But I do think it makes sense, even if you have someone who seemingly believes the opposite, and maybe someone where you think, okay, we have nothing in common. Trying to find the common ground, I think, will be very useful, because then you can see, okay, we both want this, and you believe that the way to get there is this way, and I believe this way, and so you can basically go on the same side of the table and together work toward basically a solution of, okay, we both want this problem to be solved, we have different ideas, but we can now basically move in the same direction together. And so I think that's very useful. But yeah, it's kind of a deviation from our original point about resentment. But as it's tradition, when I record these yaps, I tend to get completely off track. So it is very late, so I'm going to leave it at that. But yeah, resentment comes from ignorance, I think. Whenever I notice, not whenever, because sometimes I might have my ego be too loud, but I try to remind myself whenever I feel resentment that I probably just don't understand that person well enough. And even if I would still disagree with that person, even if, for example, I've had a conflict, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in this video already, because I had to re-record because I didn't record the first time around. But essentially, short version, I had a conflict with a person who believes that I'm evil in some way, or at least has some contempt for me and dislikes me. And it is very late. I'm forgetting my point again. But essentially, do you know this? When you are thinking that you're forgetting your point, and because you're thinking it, you then completely forget your point. Okay, let me quickly bring it back. So we had this conflict, and and I think the main reason for that is that we misunderstand each other, and that the resentment comes from this person believing that I believe things that I don't actually believe. So he believes, I mean, I don't know exactly what he believes, but from what I've heard, it sounds like he believes I believe certain things, which I don't, but or at least not in that sense. But yeah, I need to end this video because it's bad. So I see you tomorrow, unless you have deleted your internet access because you had to watch this shit. So I see you tomorrow.